Hi, I'm Ray Lamb, and this QR code is going to be a little bit about. Hi, I'm Ray Lamb, and today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the riding fundamentals, some things that you need to be pretty much. Hi, I'm Ray Lamb, and today we're going to be discussing riding fundamentals. Riding fundamentals are basically some things you need to be pretty competent at before you get on a bicycle. And some of them may seem straightforward and pretty easy, but really you'd be surprised how many people don't think about the small things. For example, we're going to start with how you get on and off the bike. You'd be surprised how many falls actually occur with people trying to get on and off of their bicycle. So I'm not sure there's an exact way to get on and off your bike, but there's some ways that are certainly easier than others. We're going to start with what I feel like is the best way to get on a bike or off a bike. I like to see, stand on the side of the bike that you're the most comfortable with, place one hand on the handlebars, one hand on the back of the saddle, on the front of the saddle. Okay, then I stand far enough away from my bike that I can tilt it towards me and take my back leg and reach over that saddle, put both feet on the ground so that I'm straddling the top tube. Now I'm in a pretty good position to get ready to get in the starting position and go forward. When I get off my bike, I just do the same thing in reverse. I make sure I keep one hand on the handlebars. I tilt the bike away from me so that I've got a little bit of, I lower the height of the bike basically. And then, instead of reaching back and grabbing the saddle, I like to keep both hands on the handlebars. It helps me to lay the bike down. I can swing the back leg over the saddle until it comes to the ground and I stand beside my bike. There's some people that tell you, hey, the best way to do it is by holding the saddle and the handlebars and then stepping over the top tube with your leg. To me, I'm getting too old to get my knee that high, especially if I'm wearing riding jeans or something of that nature. And I don't like scratching the top tube of my bike with my cleat. So for me, the best way, hand on the handlebar, hand on the saddle, stand away from the bike, let the bike lean towards you, step over with your back leg, you straddle the top tube. That's the easiest way to get on and off your bike. Steering, okay, let's see. When it comes to steering your bike, that's kind of a funny term. People think often about, taking the handlebars and turning right or left. The reality is you don't turn the handlebars very much unless you're riding at a very slow speed, maybe, manipulating a parking lot or something like that. But when you're actually at normal speeds on a bicycle, there's very little turning of the handlebars. It's quite dangerous, actually, to turn the handlebars. So when we think of steering, we don't always think of steering using the handlebars. A lot of times we use our weight. Maybe we call that counter steering to be able to steer the bike. For example, if I'm going to turn a bike, let's say I'm going to make a turn to the right. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure I pick out a good line. Visually, I have to pick out a good line as to the direction I'm going to go. Once I can see that line, then everything else gets a lot easier. Okay, if I'm turning to the right, then what I'm going to make sure I do is I'm going to have the pedal away from my turn, all the way down, the pedal on the inside towards the turn, all the way up. A couple reasons. I don't want, when the bike leans, I don't want that inside pedal to catch the ground and cause me to fall. So that pedal is going to be up. And then basically all I have to do is just sit on top of the saddle, trying to feel my weight go right down through the seat post and into the bottom bracket. And with my left foot, my outside foot, push a little bit down on this outside pedal and push a little bit forward on this inside hand. When I do that, the bike will tilt slightly and it will follow that turn. It will follow that path that I've chosen with my eyes all the way around the corner. The handlebars could maybe turn just slightly, but you would never notice it. Okay? It wouldn't be a physical turning of the handlebars which would cause the bike to skid forward and you would probably fall. So steering is done a lot more with our weight than it is actually with the handlebars. Okay. When it comes to braking, that's always important because at some point we've got to get off this bicycle. And to do that, we've got to come to a stop. There's a couple of things I always recommend, and people, again, take this for granted, but it's something you need to make it a habit to do. Come to a complete stop before you try to get off your bicycle. I know it looks cool sometimes when you roll into a stop, swing the foot over the saddle and step off, but the reality is, again, a lot of times when you're riding a road bike, after you get a little bit more proficient at riding a road bike, you'll wind up wearing cleats, okay? Shoes that actually help connect your feet to those pedals, and those are slippery. So just coming to a stop is sometimes, a very tedious task. Make sure that you come to a complete stop before you put your feet down onto the ground, okay? One of the things you got to know about stopping is this. You got to understand how the brakes work. The brake lever on the right, that controls our back brake, our rear brake. The brake lever on the left controls the front brake. Now you got to get comfortable with which hand controls which brake, because one of those brakes is when you apply it, the effect is a lot more drastic than it is with the other. For example, if I apply the back brake too early or too quick or too hard, then all that's going to happen is my back tire is going to skid a little bit. That's not great, but it normally doesn't cause you to have a bad accident. However, the opposite is true with the front brake. If I'm riding down the road and for whatever reason, I grab the front brake, I apply the front brake too hard, and this is what happens to the bike. The bike goes airborne. I mean, the back of the bike comes up, the front, catches the ground, and your weight and your momentum will be thrown forward. Normally, this results in what we call an endo, where you go head over heels over the handlebars, and it's never a pretty picture, often quite painful. I'm not saying we don't use the front brake, but you got to be careful about how you use the front brake. So the first thing you got to do is familiarize yourself with which brake is which. And I would say that takes some time just going out and riding, practice stopping, using the back brake and applying the front brake gently and vice versa, until you can feel about how much you can pull on each brake lever to get your bike to stop without the tires skidding or without you going over the front of the bike. A couple things about the brakes that you need to know on a road bike. The brakes are pretty important in that they help stop us, just like they do on a mountain bike. But the front brake doesn't get used quite as much as the back brake does, especially on a road bike. But on a mountain bike, that's just the opposite. Now, on a mountain bike, you use the brakes quite a bit to balance yourself and to keep you upright. So the front brake gets used quite a bit. If you're going down a slope, for example, and you hit the back brake, it's not going to stop you. The back tire will simply lock up and you'll just skid down the slope. So you're going to have to apply the front brake. That's about 90% or 95% of all the braking ability you have is going to be on the front when you're going down a slope. That's somewhat true on a road bike as well. It's just on a road bike we're going down the slope. It's a gentle slope normally, going down a hill somewhere, or we have some speed and we're not worried about hitting obstacles or going over obstacles. So road bikes are a little bit different than mountain bikes, but the brake system works the same. The right brake always controls the rear. The left brake lever always controls the front. Make sure you practice applying those brakes. Don't just jump on a bike and take off, but make sure you practice applying those brakes, and make sure every time before you ride your bike that the brakes are functioning properly. To explain a little bit to you about how to start and stop a bike, we need to go ahead and place the bike on the trainer so I can kind of get my point across without driving out of the view of the camera. First and foremost, once we've straddled the bicycle, like we talked about getting on our bike, then we're in a position we need to get the bike moving. And you got to remember, when you're talking about a bicycle, we only have two wheels. With two wheels, that makes momentum an extremely important deal. Without momentum, we, as well as the bike, will fall to the ground. So we've got to be able to keep momentum. A lot of times when people start and stop, you'll see people put the pedal, the outside pedal, the inside pedal, all the way down, and then they'll take their other foot and use the bike as a skateboard to get momentum, step up on the bike and start to pedal. Probably the worst idea that you could possibly have. And what I'd rather see you do is make sure that we get a good forward push to get our momentum going before we actually mount this bicycle. And the way that I suggest to do that, if you find your dominant leg, mine's my right leg, and you get the pedal. When we're talking about the pedal of the crank arm here, that's at 12 o'clock. Okay, it's pointing straight up and down. That would be over at 9. That would be down at 6. This would be at 3. I always like to see it somewhere around between 1 and 2 o'clock. Okay, just a little bit past the top of the power stroke. And that's where I place my foot on the pedal. Then when I'm ready to actually go, what I can do is really apply a good force with this leg. That gets the wheel spinning. I can coast. I can set my seat back on the saddle, place my other foot on the other pedal, and then I can resume pedaling normally. And this gives me enough momentum to make sure that I get going forward and I get on my bicycle without falling down. Okay. All right, we talked a little bit about how to get on your bike. We talked a little bit about how to start, a little bit about how to stop with the brakes and all. We need to talk a little bit about changing gears. Now, changing gears is a very, very important part of riding a bike, in that for us to ride efficiently, we have to understand how gears work on a bicycle. And that's kind of a complicated deal, but we're going to try to keep it simple for this book. Basically, I'm going to raise my foot here so you can see, but on the front of this bike we have what we call chain rings. They're pretty big. There's a big one. This particular bike only has 2. There's a big one and a little one. And then on the back of the bike, we have a cassette full with a lot of small chain ring looking things we call cogs. Okay, basically, this big chain ring on the front and that smallest cog on the back, when the chain is across those 2 pieces of equipment, then what's going to happen is it's going to be really, 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 really hard to pedal. Okay? Now that's great when we're on a flat surface and we want to gain some speed. It will allow us to get some speed. It's going to require some effort to get going, but once we get going, we're in pretty good shape. If you take the big chain ring on the front, and you take the biggest cog on the back, that would be much, much easier to pedal. As the chain moves up the cogs and the back cog gets larger and larger and larger, then the force needed to be applied to these pedals to actually get the wheels turning over is much less. Okay? So if we take the big chain ring in the front and the smallest chain ring in the back, that's going to be the highest gear that we can possibly get in, and it's also going to be the hardest gear for us to pedal in. As the chain moves inward towards the wheel, the cogs get bigger, pedaling gets easier. Now, because there's 2 rings on the front and there's several cogs on the back, we have to be careful of doing what we call cross chaining. Okay, cross chaining is when the chain on the front and the chain on the back are so sideways from each other, the chain's not running in a straight line, and it usually causes unnecessary wear and tear on both those chain rings and the cogs, as well as it will cause the chain sometimes to be dropped. And when I say drop, the chain will actually come off the chain ring, or it will come off the cogs and get stuck between the frame and the crank arms or the back of the bottom right there. When that happens, you have to get off your bike. Okay? Let's start that over. Okay, we've talked a little bit about how to get on your bike, a little bit about how to start, and a little bit about stopping, somewhat steering, and now what we need to do is talk a little bit about pedaling or using the gears on our bike. For us to ride this bike efficiently, we really have to understand the gears, and to do that, it's kind of complicated, but we're going to simplify it. For this book, I just want you to understand basically how the gears work. Basically what the gears do, and I'm going to move my foot up here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, but basically what the gears do is they allow us to change the size of our wheels without actually changing our wheels. Now that sounds kind of crazy, but a big wheel, like the old bikes used to have, the penny farthings, they had a big, big wheel with a pedal mounted to the wheel. So every time you push the pedal all the way around one revolution, the entire wheel had to turn. It was hard, it took a little bit of effort. When you're on a flat surface, it's not such a bad thing. Once you get momentum going, it gets easier to do, and you can go with some speed. Okay, if you think of the opposite of that, a tricycle. When you have pedals hooked to the front wheel of a tricycle, you can just go round and round and round, but you really never go anywhere. Okay, because that wheel is very small. One revolution equals one turn of the wheel, but it just doesn't cover much distance. We, riding a bicycle, we kind of need both of those things, but we need them at different times. For example, if we're going up a hill, that real big wheel would be hard for us to pedal. We just wouldn't be strong enough with our legs to get us up that hill. But if we're going downhill, we couldn't keep our feet on a tricycle. They would be spinning so fast the feet would want to come off. So at times, we need to be able to change the size of our wheels without changing our wheels, and that's what the gears do. On the front, we have chain rings, big rings with teeth on them. On the back, we have cogs, all mounted to a cassette, okay? Basically, here's how it works. The bigger the chain ring on the front and the smaller the cog on the back, that combination will be like a big wheel. It will be very, 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 very hard to pedal. The smallest chain ring on the front and the biggest cog on the back is like a little wheel, like a tricycle. It's much easier to pedal. And everything in the middle is a combination of the two. Now, there's a little bit of overlap in that when you're on the big ring and you move quite a bit in, that's no different than being on the little ring and moving a little bit out. So, of all the gear combinations, you probably won't use but 4 or 5 of them. But you have to figure out what 4 or 5 of those are, and that depends a lot on the terrain that you're riding on and how strong you are. So, just remember this. Big wheel on the front, little wheel on the back. That's the highest gear we can possibly be in. Very hard to pedal. High means hard. The small chain ring on the front, the big, big cog on the back, that's the lowest gear we can be in. Very, very easy to pedal. What you don't want to do is go to extremes with either one of those two scenarios. In other words, if I have the chain on the big chain ring on the front and the big chain ring on the back, the chain is actually running at an angle. That puts unnecessary wear and tear on both the sprocket of the chain ring and the cog, as well as puts you in a situation where you could actually drop the chain, where the chain could come off the chain ring or the cog and